On this channel, I covered fun versus intensity, but after my recent trip to Legendia and my first ride on Rollercoaster, it got me debating on how important height is on roller coasters. It's all well and good something being 600 feet, but as we've learnt from online dating, it's usually just there for show, as you could probably get more personality out of my nan's hip replacement. If a roller coaster's not really doing anything with that height, I find myself asking why they bothered making it that tall in the first place. There are more obvious reasons for why, such as it looking impressive and being a standout ride that people have to travel for. But if we forget the marketing side of things, what's the actual point? Height doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be faster, because roller coasters can lose speed on the way round, and the top speed is measured from the fastest point. It's like Vampire at Chessington. It's pretty slow, but at certain points it ramps up like the tunnel. You aren't chugging around the whole layout at 45 miles per hour. That would be pretty goofy. On its own, height can be pretty imposing and something that gets people talking. Hyper and Giga coasters fall into this category for being the most obvious on a skyline. And as far as engineering is concerned, I couldn't do that. So it's definitely not easy. Just wait until I start designing my own coasters. The G-force will be an afterthought. Don't get me wrong, there are so many roller coasters that do so much with the height and make it interesting with an unconventional layout, like the larger scale RMCs and Hyperion here in the UK. But in the nicest way possible, Hyperion at Energylandia just sort of fell off. The first drop was okay, but it was losing momentum on the way round, and accompanied with the shaky ride experience, I didn't really find it as memorable as something like Zadra at the same park. I much preferred the other two launch coasters because it offered more of a full package experience. Not to say that Formula has really strong theming, as it's quite loose in some areas, but Hyperion just felt sort of off. Yeah, it's tall, and it's impressive when you pull into the car park, but for me, that's all it was. It was just kind of a headlining coaster. It feels unfair to just say that Hypers and Gigas are just one big hill after another, but some quite literally are, and I don't really see the appeal. Yes, it's tall, but that's sort of it. It's not a full package experience, nor is it unique. Its goal is to try and see how many hills it can fit before the turnaround, which is where I start to enjoy Hyperion. The elements closer to the ground were much more enjoyable and fluid in motion, but things like this are all a matter of taste. I'm not Q4 qualified to share more of a thought on Giga coasters, because I haven't done any. I'm more inclined to glaze the B&M ones though, because that's my homeboy, but even I can say they are just copy-pasting hills.
But Q4, you don't get it! The airtime! I'm getting so much airtime on this ride!
But then again, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And honestly, fine. That's a good point. However, it makes it less special to that park, and instead makes it a bit of a petty comparison game for enthusiasts to nitpick.
Actually, Fury 325 has lap bars, so that means it's automatically better than Pantherian.
Even though on something as intense as that, you probably need the vest restraints or support on your neck for the amount of greying and blackouts that ride can dish out. Holy moly, we get it, your helix is thick. Stop seeking validation, we can clearly see your curves. An example inside of the UK is the beef between Blackpool and Thorpe Park after they built Hyperion. Even without the big ones record, it still remains an icon for whatever reasoning, and it feels like this crusty Arrow coaster won't be leaving anytime soon, just because of its sheer history. Most coasters will range between 0 and just under 200 feet tall. These are considered regular sized roller coasters, and many will peak at around this point in height, just after the lift hill. For a roller coaster to be classed as a hyper, it has to be between 200 feet and 299 feet tall, typically featuring an out and back layout. Over the years, there have been quite a large number of these, as it's a popular model for parks that want a headlining coaster, or something that focuses on speed through a top hat like Stealth. Now you might think, Q4, surely that's disgustingly tall, how much further are we going? Let me introduce you to the comically named Giga Coaster. A Giga Coaster starts at 300 feet tall, with only 7 operating at this time, the newest being Orion at Kings Island. A taller roller coaster sets up for a faster experience. However, not all of these coasters are made to be fast or intense. Some of them, like B&M Gigas, are made to be a graceful experience, to lightly lift you out of your seat at a perfect 0. Then you have Pantherion that, well, just rips your face off. Hold on, that sounds familiar. A coaster half the size of a hyper can deliver a far more forceful experience, while not sacrificing theme or setting. I just can't see myself preferring a huge coaster over traversing over and under landscaping, or in between trees and rocks. It's one of my favourite parts, how well integrated a roller coaster is with its surroundings. Roller coasters always feel so naked when they open, because it's always on a levelled plot of land, and there's not many trees or planting to act as shade or decoration. But when you're up that high anyway, I doubt you're going to find a tree up there. I mean, I wouldn't know. I've never tried one. Maybe trees can fly. We are quite guilty for having coasters lower to the ground in comparison to places like America, because all of our restrictions from locals or laws, even even though they know damn well that they're living next to a theme park, but that's just me. Maintenance on coasters closer to the ground can end up being a lot easier. What a lot of regular guests might not know is that these roller coasters and rides at larger parks like Thorpe Park and Alton Towers are checked regularly morning and evening. Someone has to walk their sorry ass up 236 feet of track, for free mind you, while uniques are paying over £100 for a snippet of the experience. During close season, these coasters will also get general support checks, so if you find yourself down Monk's Walk, you might just see people sat on the coaster supports really high up in the air, and I think it's really cute to see humans doing that. Thank you for your service, engineers. Taller coasters rely on way more steel and stronger supports, and the foundation being deeper into the ground, making their upkeep a bit of a nightmare depending on the manufacturer. We've all seen what can happen with coasters that are a bit too ambitious. That's without considering the sheer cost for these beasts. Is it really worth it for a park to invest in a Giga? Without trains and theme, the most recent Giga coaster, Orion, cost an estimated $30 million to build, which is just obscene, literally worth more than SBF Visa's whole portfolio. Now, you might think that because a ride is taller, that it should be longer, providing more value for queue time, and in most cases, that is true, but then you have roller coasters like Hyperia, which sort of feel half-baked. The elements are crazy, but due to budget and circumstances, the length of the layout was definitely an afterthought. I always find myself slamming into the brakes a bit too hard, meaning there was definitely more than enough speed to have a few more twists and turns closer to the ground before the brake run. Another drawback to height is that the taller you go, the more unreliable it can become. This is definitely true for the big one because of its location. Now, I don't know about you, but because of how thin I am, I might blow away in the wind, so I'm glad they don't run it in that weather. But then it means a lot of the time people are disappointed when they make the journey there for the headline coaster to just be closed. This obviously isn't all the park's fault. Blackpool seemed to be constantly fighting for its life against wind, but even down south with Hyperia, it's had its fair few issues because of similar circumstances. At least the big one makes it round, am I right? Sure? Valleying jokes, really funny. Yes, they're still funny, don't worry guys. The main draw for such a huge investment at a park is the smooth, floaty, sort of rich people feeling of airtime. It's like the Dubai chocolate of coasters. You're either sick and tired and hope that the trend just dies, or you really enjoy the copy-paste cash grab. I'm kidding, if you like these, please don't sue. Not all hypers do fall into this category though. I've only ever done one RMC, Zadra and Energylandia, but it really does put into perspective what can be done with height. It's so unconventionally awesome, and you just have no idea where you're going. Many of the headlining RMC coasters share a similar height, such as Lightning Rod, Steel Vengeance, Zadra and Iron Gwazi at the 200 feet mark, but they aren't known for their height. Even though they are physically imposing, they're known for their whippy transition and what comes after the main drop. I think a lot of coasters are so focused on the first drop that they completely lose sight on everything else. They don't waste height as a marketing ploy, but instead use it as a tool to achieve such insane elements: airtime hills, inversions, stalls, outer banks, the lot. A lot of massive roller coasters struggle with pacing. You're fighting for your life on the first 20 seconds, and then afterwards it's a small meander back to the station. Height should be treated as the foundation for everything else, and not the star of the show, because while it's tall, it's not at the front of your mind once you get off of it. Instead, you're sat there cheesing because of how crazy the ride was and how you went your whole life without it. The best part of a roller coaster is when something unexpected happens. Now, I don't mean the coaster derailing, that would be slightly unfortunate, but a clever use of height can surprise you more than the ones that are sold solely off of that function. Kanan comes to mind because of that sense of distortion, surprise, or whip you might not have braced for, and these can end up being the best elements on a coaster. Think about something as stupid as Voltron's pogo stick at the beginning of the ride. If you went into things without knowing a damn thing, that would be pretty memorable, as it's just stupid to look at or feel. If you're an intensity chaser, you might actually prefer Let Coaster or a classic B&M invert. It might not be everyone's first thought, but height really does clash with theme, because tell me why Hyperion is plonked next to a princess castle. I was giggling the whole time when I first saw that, because yes, good morrow my lord, the Millennium Falcon awaits your presence. I know some of the theming at the park isn't that cohesive, but I think that's probably the strangest area. Hyperion is like a survival games, but blue and sponsored by Pepsi. Zadra does a much better job at establishing it inside of a medieval area. The fact it's made from wood and steel just helps to sell the idea that it fits in. You could say the same for the space station, as a modern Intamin makes sense for a space theme. But on God, the positioning of the ride takes me out. What screams space better than a churro, you tell me? Just because something looks good on paper doesn't mean it's gonna be a world-class experience. Not to mention the fact that something like a Hyper or Giga as a standout coaster can actually draw guests crests away. A lot of people are quite comfortable with a coaster at the lower end of height, but as soon as something crests over into the hyper area, they lose interest because of the crossovers from a fear of heights. So if a park wants a crowd pleaser, height can be less impactful than they might think. Even though it brings press, I can guarantee that there's a much larger handful of people that are bag holders for Hyperia over something like Soar. The GP flip-flopping love Soar. Taller coasters, in theory, require a lot more space for their layout, but a smaller coaster can cross over itself and pack into a smaller footprint, like the Smiler. It's just a big clump of track. I've seen a hairball with less crossovers than the Smiler. But height doesn't just affect the ride. The adrenaline can hit you mid-queue line, making the anticipation way scarier than the ride itself. Sometimes the panic itself is a part of the experience, but I always see that as a cheap tactic to scare people away, like me, only for us to come off after, sort of disappointed because our anxiety was larger than the first drop. A lot of the time, the best innovations don't need extreme height. There are a lot of coasters under 100 feet that can still blow you away with intensity, even though they might not have the height. I just found it really interesting that something like Letcoaster could have me near blackout, while Hyperia, Zadra, and Hyperion couldn't. I'm not usually one to be susceptible to greyouts and things like that, but every time I went on this coaster, I was nearly out. But I do have a tip to help with that, as I learned from Coaster Tog. If you squeeze your thighs, you can stop the blood from escaping your head, which stops you from greying or blacking out. Honestly, it's a mixed bag. Height sets the stage, it looks impressive, and looks good on the manufacturer's portfolio. But if the layout beyond that doesn't back it up, you're just left with a very expensive drop tower. For me, it's more about the emotion behind a roller coaster, rather than how fast or intense a coaster is. But I think it's important to think about what the height lets you achieve. I'm not the biggest fan of copy-pasting rides, and I think the taller you get, the more at risk of that you become. A 100-foot ride can definitely hit harder than the 300-foot one, if it's designed right. But that's just my personal preference. But what do you think? Is height really that important on roller coasters, or are the short enthusiasts just compensating, myself included? It's hard being a crocodile. Sobek, the ancient Egyptian god, keeps calling me short, but I just think he's in denial. If you like this video or I made you laugh, consider checking out some of my other videos, or even subscribe. Also, massive shout out to these awesome people for doing this cute art for the greater cause of Q4. And remember that voting ends on the 1st of September. So if you like my videos, consider voting for me in the UK Theme Park Awards in the Developing Creator section. I hope you guys are all doing well. Take care, nerds. Did you hear they added guns to Ghost Train? I feel like that's a strange addition, but it still sounds cool. It didn't last very long, as someone thought they could bring in their own. Oh, yeah. Someone probably should have specified that a war tank isn't allowed on Thorpe Park grounds. Oh yeah, because people just casually...
Hey guys, Colossus has a 5-minute queue. We should get going.
2 plus 2 equals 6. And let me tell you why it equals 6. Because look at this. There are 2 2s. So therefore there is an additional 2 that no one talks about because the government